welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sesotris, and this week I wanted to do a video about navigating problematic books and problematic authors. When you're reading classics, a lot of times you encounter this, and so it's just something to be kind of aware of. Now, first off, I'm going to say two things. If you're looking for excuses to read and enjoy hateful books without feeling bad, then this isn't the book. This isn't the video for you. I'm not giving a free pass. This is all on you to make decisions. That's what's best for you. Second, I'm not advocating for censorship or editing of problematic books. I don't think that anything is gained by changing books, even if they're really awful. There's nothing gained from changing them. We need to keep them in their unedited form so that we can learn from them and grow and not make mistakes like those authors did. Because a lot of times, hateful content in books came from a fact that it was so acceptable and so unchallenged that you could have stuff like that in a book, and people would be like, oh, that's a little uncouth, but it didn't really bother them. And so it just kind of goes to show you how mainstream a lot of the hate was. And we still have issues with this today. This hasn't changed a lot. Nowadays, a lot of the hate is just sort of hidden and lives in dark, spooky corners. And that's really depressing. But we can be critical thinkers and move forward when navigating books and authors who maybe aren't the best people and books that aren't really that great. So this is what I'm going to be talking about, and hopefully we can all have a good discussion without getting angry. So the first question that probably is going to come up is, why are problematic books a problem at all? After all, can't we just read whatever we want and let people kind of make their own choices? The answer is you can absolutely read whatever you want. That is your decision. The problem is more about what books are being promoted and shared, and just thinking critically about that. It's all about not letting certain hateful texts sort of slip under the radar and influence people by letting them think that maybe certain stereotypes are more common. And there's two different kinds of, I guess, problematic text. There's ones where an author is actively promoting hateful things, and then there's others where it's more just done out of ignorance. The author just didn't do enough research, or they didn't really understand what they were talking about, or they just use stereotypes that they've seen elsewhere. And so there wasn't really a hateful intent, but it still comes across as really ignorant, and it's still not great. So you just need to be aware of the stuff, and it's all about sort of what you choose to promote online and what you choose to share and give a platform to. That's kind of what's more really important. People can read whatever they want, and if people want to read something that's awful, that is their choice. I'm not advocating that we ban books or take books off shelves because we don't want people reading them because they're bad. It's just people need to be aware that something is problematic, and then they need to make their own decision about whether or not they want to engage with it, and then also whether or not they want to share it and promote it to others. So that's kind of the answer to that question. So I'll start off with an anecdote. So The King and I is a musical that has been pretty important to me for a long time. I saw it when I was very young, and I fell in love with it, and so there's a big nostalgia factor built into that. Now, with that said, if you watch The King and I with me, because, it may happen, I am going to absolutely sigh dreamily over Anna's silver dress. That dress is amazing, and I love it so much. But I will also point out that this movie is super problematic. It employs stereotypes, and they didn't hire any Asian actors for any of the principal Asian roles. Pretty much every single main cast member, I'm pretty sure every single main cast member who plays an Asian character is in yellowface. So it's not great, and it's really unfortunate. And it's kind of sad because Rodgers and Hammerstein have another movie musical that came out a few years earlier called Flower Drum Song. And while that one still isn't the best, there's still some stereotypes and stuff in there. They did hire almost a completely Asian American cast, and they're really appropriate for the setting, and they all do a fantastic job. The music is wonderful. And so it's a little puzzling that when they did this one, they thought, I don't know if we can actually hire Asian people to play these Asian characters. That might be too difficult. Because, like, you did it for a movie already. Anyways. And even though the cast and crew of that movie are genuinely really talented, but they're all in yellowface. So it's really not great. Also, that film kind of presents Thai culture as a sort of like orientalized Disneyland version of it to kind of appeal to white audiences. It's the people who are working on it, it's very clear that they did research in terms of like looking at pictures and said, okay, we're just going to copy what we see in the pictures, but they didn't really understand the culture. And so a lot of it looks kind of authentic, but I wish they'd had like actual Thai people in the cast who could have rendered the art and the design of everything, the costumes, everything a little more realistically. And I wish that they had managed kind of the dialogue a little bit better. Everyone is sort of in this very stereotypical, like, broken English accent thing that it doesn't feel authentic. It feels stereotypical, and it's just really, really sad. So with this movie, it's the kind of thing you can watch it as like a fantasy movie. Just be aware when you're watching it, this does not reflect actual reality. It does not reflect the actual culture of the Thai people. And I know in Thailand, a lot of the folks there, they really are not a fan of both the musical and the movie. They feel like it's offensive, and they're right. That's totally true. So it's just one of those things. It's like, this is something I was exposed to when I was very young, before I was able to kind of break it down. And it's a flashy, colorful movie. The music is gorgeous. And so when you're a little kid, of course, you're going to be like, wow, this is amazing. And I've grown up with it, and I'm really critical of it now. And, I could go on for pages and pages and pages of just how offensive and tone deaf the film is. But it does still have that nostalgia factor for me, so it's really difficult for me to leave it completely alone. But you do have to be aware, even if it's something that you love dearly, you do have to know that this is not something that accurately represents the people that it's talking about, and so it can be really offensive. It is really, really offensive to a lot of people. So be aware of that and kind of make your choices accordingly. So bringing this back to books, there's a few questions that you need to ask when you're kind of dealing with something that's problematic. First off, is the author alive today and actively causing harm? If a hateful author is actively campaigning to hurt marginalized people, then I'd say keep that in mind when you're choosing who to give money to and who to support and who to promote on your channel or on your social media or to your friends. It is your choice for sure what to do with your money, but be aware of what they do with that money and be aware of what message that sends. People will bring up there's no ethical consumption under capitalism argument, and what that applies to is things like necessities. Let's say you have to go to work to support your family or to keep your apartment from, going away because capitalism's awful. You do have to, you do have to pay for gas, and gas is absolutely not ethical, because the cheapest gas that a lot of people want is the stuff that's done without lots of regulations and whatnot. So yes, I know, Circe agrees. Yes, baby. But or if you're talking about like when you're supporting a family and you have to get food, but you're strapped for cash, and so you go for the stuff that's the cheapest, most affordable. It's usually going to be stuff that's supported by big corporations, and you just have to kind of suck it up and do it because you have to feed your family, even if, you can't afford the big, expensive, organic, cruelty-free stuff. Sometimes you just have to support big corporations. Okay. big corporations, and there's no way to do that kind of ethically sometimes. So that is what the no ethical consumption under capitalism means. When it comes to things like entertainment, that is an extra thing. So you do absolutely have the ability to speak with your wallet, as they say, and support things that you believe in. If it's something that, let's say, there's a lot of nostalgia associated with it, something like, The King and I, if you really, really want to give them your money, you just have to be aware, what are they going to do with the money that I give them? So if the author that has said some difficult things, or who is actively campaigning to harm people, if you're saying, oh, well, I can give them my money, it's okay, then be aware of that. So that's the one question. Are they alive today? Are they actively causing harm? Because that is something you need to think of when you're making a decision to support them. So the next question is it possible to separate the art from the artist? And the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. As an example, I'm going to bring up Alice Walker. Now, Alice Walker is an incredible author and a scholar, and she's single-handedly responsible for bringing Zora Neale Hurston back to public consciousness. This author was completely unknown for a very long time, had completely fallen into complete obscurity, and it is Alice Walker who kind of brought her back to the public attention, and now she's as widely read as, Tolstoy, So I really acknowledge the good that this author has done, but lately she has allegedly supported anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists, which is really sad. But I can separate this book from the author, because those hateful ideas aren't in this book. This was written before she kind of fell down that strange rabbit hole. And I think this book is still important, and it's still meaningful, and it still deserves to be read. So, I can separate, the art from the artist. I would say maybe get this book used if you can. But still, it's, the author is not, her ideas in this book are different from kind of where she is now. And hopefully this is all just, a misunderstanding and, all that kind of stuff. But it seems like she's kind of doubled down on it here and there. So I can separate this book from the author, because her beliefs now don't reflect the content of this book. This is a very, very different book, and I still think it's an important book. So, it's as a counterexample, I'm going to bring up Gone with the Wind. Now, Gone with the Wind is a book that has white supremacist ideology baked into it, and it's not just that there's racist characters in it, which isn't bad. For a novel, sometimes for verisimilitude, you have to have racist characters in it, but the omniscient narrator itself backs up ideas that enslaved people needed to be enslaved to give them a purpose. It's awful. The descriptions of certain characters are full of just vile stereotypes, and I have no desire to ever read that one again or promote it or anything. And I will say that at a craft level, just plot, character, and everything, it was incredibly well written. I did appreciate the art that went into kind of crafting this story, but I'm never going to read it again, because the book itself is just, it's got white supremacy baked into it, and it's incredibly hateful, and there's all kinds of other amazing books that you can read that don't have that kind of garbage in it. So, be aware of what you're promoting. In that case, the book definitely represents the author's ideas. And so in that case, you can't separate the art from the artist. The art and the artist. The art is in service of the artist's hateful ideas. And I'm sorry, Margaret Mitchell, but I'm just not interested in ever reading that book ever again. The third question to ask is, can a problematic work be recontextualized? So I'm going to start off by saying I'm a big fan of James Bond. I love the movies so much, and I do like the novels too. But the novels are very, very indicative of kind of the prejudices and fears of white English society in the 50s. There's a longing for a return to empire, and there's a suspicion on pretty much everyone who's not white. It's awful. And Bond himself is not a good person. In the movies, he's much more charming, but in the books, he's like chauvinistic, he's fat phobic, he's racist, he's ableist, he's really homophobic. It's just, he's not a good person. And the only reason that I enjoy the books is because they're really, really interesting when you analyze them through a queer lens. I know that sounds completely bizarre, but like the books themselves, they're not queer. They're very, very much not the case. But Fleming himself had a great many gay friends, and there's this element of Bond feeling like an other or an outsider in society. He doesn't feel like he gets to participate in things, and the most meaningful kind of relationships in his life are with men. He does get married at one point, but the connections that he makes where he kind of opens up and really sees them as a person are all with other men. And so it's that subtext is kind of what makes the books interesting. I enjoy the movies just because they're ridiculous, and the movies themselves have also kind of changed the character over the years to fit changing social norms. For example, the film version of Live and Let Die is very much more about Bond as a white person entering into black spaces where he knows that he shouldn't be, kind of thing. In the book version, it's much more racist. It's much more hateful. It's almost about like, the communities in the United States where you see kind of a high density of black people. It's all about they're plotting against white people, and you have to kind of invade their secret society to kind of get at them. Whereas in the movie, they just embraced kind of the blaxploitation films that were popular at the time. And Roger Moore himself, who was a great person, he never infused his character with a disdain for the characters. Now, there is still some problematic elements in the film, but the film made it a point to be like, these people aren't evil, they're just trying to keep you out of their space because it's the only space that they have, and you're invading kind of their space. And then, of course, in that, there's also kind of the bad guys as well. But the film does a really good job of kind of taking the plot of the book, which is incredibly racist, and moving it kind of into the 70s. And I think if that were made today, it would be made much more sensitively. The story would be not racist or hateful at all, and they'd be able to find something really interesting in there. So it's like the core of the story is interesting, but the culture that it was made in the 50s, it's a horribly racist book. It's awful. But the film version in the 70s, you can see that it's kind of making progress in a good direction. And of course now, the Bond universe is super inclusive and open. All of the fun stuff from Fleming has been retained, but all of the awful stuff has been left in the past. We've got books like this now, where you've got the James Bond universe, and you've got characters who are queer, you've got characters who are disabled, and you've got powerful women who aren't belittled or treated like they're not infantilized in any way. And so the universe itself is growing and changing and evolving, and I love that. So it's still a fun world to play in, but you do still need that kind of those original books to look back to see kind of where we've come from and sort of what elements we've thankfully left behind in the past. Another example would be H.P. Lovecraft. Lots of other booktubers and people have done much more in-depth analyses of Lovecraft, but the thing with him is that again, I don't think we need to censor his stuff, but his books are all, they're all based around this fear of like immigrants coming in, and this concept of what, threatening the purity of kind of white society. It's awful, and it's baked into all of his stuff. I don't really enjoy reading Lovecraft, but the world that he created is interesting enough that we have other authors who have taken it and run with it in really interesting ways. I always tell people my favorite Lovecraft is books not written by Lovecraft. You've got books like Victor LaValle's The Ballad of Black Tom, and you've also got, let's see, what's another one? Oh, The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which is another one that kind of plays in that Lovecraftian world. And it works. You know, you've got Lovecraft Country is another one that I'm thinking of. It's like there's so much in there that can be used to analyze systemic racism and like white supremacy and how it's baked into everything, and it's really genuinely interesting. You know, the real monsters become sort of society that's like conspired to kind of hold minorities down, and it's really interesting and engaging, and it kind of takes you in really cool directions. So, you know, we've recontextualized Lovecraft stuff. It's like we've pulled it out of his grubby little racist hands, and we've given it to better authors who can say really interesting things in the world that he created. So I don't see him as some kind of visionary who should be lauded and, you know, everything. He's someone who kind of accidentally stumbled onto a really cool metaphorical framework, and better authors without a hateful agenda have been able to take that framework and tell really good stories. But I do keep the original Lovecraft around. I've considered, you know, donating this a number of times but I feel like it's still important. You need to see just how vitriolic and hateful this kind of stuff can be, because I feel like if you don't, it's really easy to kind of trick yourself to be like, oh, people are just overreacting, you know, Lovecraft wasn't that bad, you know, I think people are just too sensitive nowadays, or something like that. And you really do need to keep his stuff around to be able to see it's like, no, he really was that bad. But you need to kind of keep that reminder of the past so that you can move forward and do really cool things in the future. So I don't think we need to get rid of problematic media, but we should analyze it and be aware of why it's problematic, and learn from that so we can kind of make better choices down the road. So what's the conclusion that we can kind of draw from all this? The big thing is just do your research on the authors that you read. You know, you don't want to ever read anything blindly, and just, you know, suggest it to other people without doing your proper research. Be aware of prejudices that are in the text. Now, I also want to, I've said this before, but I want to specify that's different from prejudiced characters existing in a text. For example, Huck Finn is not a racist book. You know, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens was not a racist person. He was a very forward-thinking person, and he uses this book to tell a story of kind of humanity. And so there are racist characters in the book, and there's language that is pretty hateful in the book, but it's used by racist characters, and Twain uses that to tell a story about Jim, who is a very human character and is a very important character and is presented in very positive ways. So be aware of that distinction. Just because a book has racism in it doesn't mean it's a racist book. Gone with the Wind is a racist book. This is not. Other things you can do: diversify your social media circles. If you only ever follow like white people of a certain age group, then you're probably going to get a pretty narrow a narrow vision of things. You want to diversify that. You want to read other writers you wouldn't normally read. You want to expand your circle. You want to kind of challenge yourself, and that's a big thing. Another question is another thing is don't get defensive. A lot of times you might encounter an author who you really have always loved, and you discover something really awful about them. I had this happen recently with Flannery O'Connor, a really important writer in Southern fiction and Southern Gothic and everything, but Flannery O'Connor was incredibly racist. Another one is, oh, where is it? Here it is. Jack London. I really like Jack London, but the author himself held some pretty awful beliefs, and that kind of hurt me because I mean, especially Call of the Wild. It's one of my favorite books, but it's just like dogs, it's just, you just follow a dog the whole time. There's barely any people. But you do need to be aware of that kind of stuff. Don't get defensive, and don't think of it as a personal attack on you. When someone calls out an author or a text for being hateful, or for even just being ignorant, even if it wasn't intentionally made to spread hate, there are books that are just, they're not thought through, and sometimes they use stereotypes, or they just make decisions in the text that are just kind of unsettling. An example recently would be House in a Cerulean Sea. Really well regarded by a lot of people. I know it's a really cozy book, and it's an important queer book for a lot of people, but the premise of it is based on a really horrible human rights violation that we're only just starting to kind of realize the sheer enormity of it. The 60s scoop, where Native children were taken from their families and kind of forced to assimilate into white culture in like residential schools and such. So like, be aware of that. I know the author probably didn't intend it, but it was kind of one of those things where he kind of read about it and said, oh, that's a cool concept. I'm going to like sanitize it and make it sort of happy and cuddly. And that's just, it's a little tone deaf. So I'm not saying that TJ Klune is a hateful author, but that book in particular is just, it doesn't sit quite right with a lot of people. So be aware of that, and don't get defensive if people kind of call you out for promoting a book that maybe has hateful elements. They're not attacking you, they're just trying to protect others, because you don't want these kinds of things to spread without people thinking critically about them. Critical thinking is the most important thing. Like I said, you can read whatever you want, you can promote whatever you want, but just be aware of what kinds of things you're reading and how they're affecting your view of the world, and also how you're presenting them to the world. If you gloss over certain things, it could hurt someone kind of down the road. So be aware of that. I didn't want this to be a preachy video, but I know dealing with classics especially, because I love reading classics, but you are going to encounter stuff that's just, it kind of catches you off guard. You're like, ugh, I wasn't expecting that. And so you just need to kind of be aware of what you're reading, and be smart, and ask questions, and do your research, and just don't accept anything as sort of representing the real world. You always want to be a bit skeptical. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. All right, bye.